All right, guys. We got a very special guest tonight, Dr. John Matthias from Hidden True Crime. He is somebody that I'm talking around him like he's not here, but he's somebody I've actually known now since 2020. I met you in 2020.
Yeah. Was it 2020? Is that when
it
they
was
did that?
2020? Yep, the end of it, November.
Okay. For some reason,
And-
I want to say 2021, but yeah,
Right.
wow, that's
Yeah.
okay.
I think it was 2020 because I think we still
Yeah,
had the
I think you're
deep
right.
COVID protocol. Remember,
Yeah, you're
we had the
right.
masks and everything.
We did, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember I didn't actually have any idea what the plan was. I didn't know what we were doing there. And she said, "You're going to talk to someone named Dr. John." I said, "Okay, great." So, I walked in not knowing what the expectation was. And I think you and I talked for at least an hour plus.
Yeah, actually we talked for almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
And
And you were the first person, honestly, the first person I heard speak about my mom without a bias. I think you were the first person that was just giving me an insight that I thought was really interesting because nobody had ever said anything. No one ever looked at her as a human being. She was just thrown as, people have a tendency to say that person's crazy. They're nuts.
Yeah.
They're this, they're that. So it's really easy to just write someone off and say, that's the easy way out, is to say, oh, someone's crazy. But you had such a different approach, and that really drew me to your perspective,
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that because I think that's one of the things we try to do on our channel is to really dig a little deeper and add some depth to the cases we cover so that things are a little more complex.
Yeah.
And they're not reduced to your mother's a witch or your mother's evil or
Right.
right.
Yeah.
And so but there's a knee-jerk reaction to do that in the true
Right.
crime world. I'm sure you've learned that pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
So thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Speaking of your channel, I mentioned it before. I think it was in one of the other podcast episodes, but when I started to really palette everything, I really didn't know where to start because I didn't want to hear everybody's take. And what I mean by that is that I didn't really listen to media for this whole case because it's too overwhelming. What am I supposed to do? Sit there and listen to every different viewpoint, and there's so much information and then people's opinions and their videos. So when I actually, after Chad's trial, I was ready to actually just learn more about what I'd missed. And your guys' channel was right there. And I remember the first thing I listened to was your reaction to the statement. And then again, it reaffirmed our conversation that you don't come in with that sword of judgment, that you were really talking it out as you were going through it. And you and Lauren both. And I really appreciated that because then it gave me the thought. And I told you before we started recording, it was like I was talking to you guys in my head, like answering questions or like, but it was, again, it helped with processing, so that's when it was like, maybe I want to talk more about this stuff. So
yeah, I love that, by the way, because one of our goals in our channel is to facilitate dialogue or to provoke some discussion and dialogue. And I offer an opinion. I offer a perspective. It's a perspective informed by 20 plus years of professional experience, but it's still a perspective. And I want people to engage with us.
Yeah.
I want people to have, like you did, like to have that dialogue as we talk about something and try to break it down and make sense of it. I want people to own it and make it their own and to contribute to what we're talking about. So I really appreciate that you were doing that.
Yeah. And again, this world is so crazy. I'm sure you have seen there's no rationality and people get really worked up. And I think it's great for people to share their opinions, but also at the same time, it was complex for me because I'm on the side of, I'm kind of the oddball in a sense of like, I don't side with my mom or like go with her at all. Like, yeah, of course she's my mom, but there's two pieces of you. There's the complete disconnect because I know what it is. And then there's part of me that remembers her and knows her. And you guys stay kind of in between the two. Does that make sense? So that's why it was so easy. And I appreciate that. I just wanted you to know that publicly. I really do appreciate that because that was the newest perspective I had. So
Okay, cool.
One of the questions that I had for you, I
Mhm.
watched your video about the interview. And one of the questions I had for you, not just your overall reaction, because you kind of gave that, right? But based off of our conversation before you had heard my mom speak,
Mhm.
I wanted to know what you think. And this is a broad question, but I kind of want to ask you this question. What do you
Okay.
think as far as compared to where we were in 2020 when this has kind of had a million question marks, and now here we
Yeah.
are 2024, it's way more concluded and wrapped up. I wanted to know what you think about her diagnosis as a hyper religious, what was it? I don't even know her diagnosis, but it was her
Yeah.
diagnosis that they gave her. I wanted to know what you think based off of what you heard her say for herself, because that was the whole point of the interview, is to give her a platform to say her piece. So I wanted to know what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, as a mental health professional, of course, I'm not supposed to diagnose someone I haven't seen, and since I
Right.
haven't seen your mother or talked to her, I can't really diagnose per se.
Right.
So I would just kind of defer to the professionals that did diagnose, and my
Yeah.
sense is, from what I've seen, my sense is that they're pretty accurate. It
Yeah.
seems like there have been multiple diagnoses they provided,
Right.
and they're all kind of in the same ballpark. There's the
Right.
delusional disorder with the hyper religiosity.
Yeah.
There's some personality disorder stuff that some people defined it, some didn't. Some said there might be some narcissism, right? So it- it- you know, I think the people that did that work, I think they were pretty accurate, and
Yeah.
from what I can tell, I mean, to come to a conclusion on my own, I'd have to meet your mom and
Yeah.
probably do some testing, and as you and I both know, I'm sure she wouldn't be thrilled to be in that position.
She would avoid you like the plague.
Right, yeah. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure I'm pretty sure mom wouldn't wanna be in the same room
No.
with me. So
No.
what was the term she used for me again?
She said you're on Lucifer's team because you're part of the movie.
Right. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm on Lucifer's team, and people on Lucifer's team, typically aren't gonna be allowed to, interact with
no,
your mom
no,
too much. So
no.
I think the people that have talked about, the people that have done this work, I think they've done a good job. And
Yeah.
one way I can answer the question though is, when we first met in 2020, and
Yeah.
Lauren and I were going through all the documents, and at that point there were thousands of documents that had been released, which is one of the reasons I felt fairly comfortable talking about the case, is because I felt like I had an abundance of information, including Chad Daybell's autobiography, right? And like, nobody I assess in a prison has an autobiography.
No, that's
So,
crazy.
right, so it provides kind of a unique perspective, but we had all this information, and so I felt like I had a pretty good grasp of what was going on with your mom. And moving forward to where we are now from then, it feels to me like a lot of this is the same.
Yeah.
I don't feel like your mom has budged too much between
No.
fall of 2020. Was it, I want to say it was like October. I think it was like almost October, wasn't it, around this time of the
Yeah.
year?
Yeah.
I remember
We
it
were
was fall.
Mhm.
And in many ways, and I remember you guys, you and the Netflix folks crew, they played the infamous phone call
Yeah.
when you had called your mom like a month or two prior to the Netflix filming, when you and I
Yeah.
met, and you guys played that call for me, and I was just blown away. I was like, "Holy cow! Like,
Yeah.
this is pretty much what we assessed your mom to be, right? Or to like
Right.
and um and moving forward, going from that call to the call you just played a week ago, it doesn't feel like a lot has changed for your mom. I mean, I think your mom has kind of been stuck in this really narrow silo, and she hasn't really budged for many years, I think.
Yeah. And that's I think that was what I think what's really interesting is in 2020 when
Mhm.
she was arrested, I
Yeah.
called her. I went to Idaho and I saw her for the first time. And I called her right after that trial that she had where she showed up and she smiled at Kay and Larry and Brandon. And I remember
Yeah.
looking at her
Yeah.
like, "What was that?" Like, it was like seeing a different person.
Yeah.
And I talked to her for a couple of months, and she just kinda kept it together. Like, she sounded like the same person, and there was a sanity in her tone was, "Don't worry about it. Don't
Mhm.
worry about the kids. Everything's fine. I promise you." Like, basically just reassurance of, "I'm the same, and this is all out of proportion." That's all I ever heard every day, and her and I weren't having these conversations where it was really a ton of back and forth. It was kinda like, "Okay, it's another day. It's the middle of COVID, you know,
Yeah.
what's the
Right.
deal?" Like, what she's like, "I'm working on it," you know? So there's like this idea, well, okay, there's no way it's this bad, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the media is blowing this out of proportion or something else is going on, but there's just no way it's worst case scenario.
Mhm.
And after she after so actually the last time we spoke, and I spoke about this not too long ago, the first thing she says in our call one random day is she goes, "Do you remember about Abraham and Isaac?" And I
Mhm.
remember thinking in my head, why would you ever bring that up?
Yeah.
And for anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's the story
Right.
about Abraham being asked by God to sacrifice Isaac, his son, and he doesn't have to end up doing it, but it was a test of faith. But for her
Right.
to even bring up child sacrifice on
Yeah.
a phone call with me, that's when I kind of just I completely stopped talking to her. And I don't think it was 2 weeks later that they called me. And so the
Yeah.
reason I ask you that question is because when I called her again, obviously I'm like, "What are you how could you talk to me
Yeah.
and speak to me like this, like we're just talking, and have all this be going on in the background and act like nothing ever happened?" And so I think it took me years to believe that there was actually something like, because in my mind, I'm like, "You know exactly what you did. You know exactly what this is. There's no way you're missing. I don't care what they diagnose you with."
Yeah.
But going into this last call, she doubled down harder
Yeah.
than ever, harder than ever. And so the reason I was asking that question is because, and you just made a great point, is she hasn't changed this stuff. And I guess in my perspective as a son, I never looked at it that way. But she doesn't want to change her mind about what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a deep level of denial that it would be really, really hard to break through.
Yeah.
And, in fact, one of the things we talked about 4 years ago with the Netflix people was, were there signs of some of this before?
Yeah.
Were there some red flags in your childhood? And you talked about a few of them. I thought that was interesting. I haven't shared. The Netflix people asked me not to share any of that, so I never
Yeah.
did. Although I guess technically we probably could have, but
Right.
especially since the documentary was released like what, 2 years ago now, a year and a half. I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
remember.
I don't even remember. They just, yeah, that's something else, that whole documentary.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I mean, that conversation we had, I felt like honestly went to waste too, because I think that you were helping me in that time because it was fresh.
yeah.
Again, we just found
It
out that
was.
summer. So it was very fresh. And the whole goal was to talk about that kind of thing, like growing up and that stuff. And they didn't want to use that. They had a different kind of spin to it. But the whole point of having that conversation with you is like, I don't think I was ready to process that.
Yeah,
And now that I'm older, and it's the hardest thing ever, actually, because I had no idea what it'd be like to release this. You know, I asked her to interview, so it was never ever people. I've seen people be like, Does she know?" She 1000% knew. I think I asked her 3 times before I said, "As clear as day, this is your opportunity to say what you want." And I don't think a lot of people know she's wanted to say stuff, apparently.
well, you at the end, you told her, you said,
Yeah,
this is going to be public, so
yeah. Yeah, she knew it. Well, it was not
Yeah.
a it was not a secret. So anything she said, even though she kept saying that, she's like, "I don't want this to be public, whatever." I was like, "Well, you said it in your statement. Whatever
Yeah.
it is you said it. You just didn't say it." And I think that was the hardest part is once I did that and I started seeing some of the comments and I started thinking back about what it was really like, I feel like I have a train of stuff I've got to unpack and remembering.
Yeah.
One of the things that's hard too is her bringing up the end of the world all the time.
Yeah.
And that's a hard
You,
thing to have on weighing on you. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, you talked about that during our interview 4 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
One thing you talked about back then that would probably be relevant to diagnosing her to some degree was the fact that she was so extreme in some ways, right? Like her
Yeah.
emotions and her behaviors, right?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that it's really hard to process now because it's making me realize
Okay.
what it was like. It's like,
Yeah.
man, this is how it really was. Because I guess when you're a kid, you just kind of function at whatever ability you have. You just don't know anything different. And so we would have conversations, and I felt like I could never tell my mom something because she would have a worse reaction than anything, right? So a simple thing is you break a vase, you go tell your mom I broke the vase. The conversation thereafter would be her having a level 10 reaction to something that's more of a level 3. And so
Okay.
that was the average type of thing. So I became way more clammed up. And I kind of just always became a people pleaser because I needed to cater to not upsetting her, a very emotional thing. And I just started processing that, because
Yeah.
I'm like, why am I always trying to be beyond nice when it's not even nice? You're literally just neglecting yourself to please someone else. That's
Right.
not the type of life I want. But again, like I felt like I burdened her. And so because she's how do I put this? She's very fantastical. My mom, the more I realize, because now that I'm a parent, and
Yeah.
that's the best example I could give you now. Now that I have girls, my girls, and I think about the stuff she did, I'm like, bro, I'd never do that to my daughters. Like, I would never just make it a fun, everything's happy, let's just try to play it off. Like every time it was hard for us, you just run. That was the answer.
Right.
And you grow up like that, you have to break that cycle. You can't run when it gets
Yeah.
hard and you just can't tune out, right? Um, but one of the other things that was really hard too is there was never that ability to lean on her for me because I couldn't really burden her with emotions because I was afraid of her reaction. And the fantastical part was I feel like we didn't live in really a true reality. It was always kind of like we just did the weirdest stuff. We moved every single year. We moved sometimes middle of the semester of school year and just things that I'm like, what was the purpose of that? Like who was green lighting that? Like why would you do that? And I get it. There's circumstances I don't know, but I was a kid. But
Yeah.
to constantly have to move and change your environment and constantly be talking about the end of the world and constantly telling me as a child, I'm going to die soon, right? Like, why are you telling me at 8 years old your death date's coming up in 2 years? That's the type of stuff I'm realizing that crap affects you.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that you didn't. Yeah, that was something we did not talk about 4 years
Yeah,
ago. But
yeah.
was that so? The dying soon, was that a function of the apocalypse coming?
I don't. It didn't. So here's the weird thing, right? I'm gonna get into this a little bit deeper.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
she started off telling me when I was younger about her dying soon. This became a thing. I remember she sat me down in the kitchen and she says something about having only 2 years to live. And I must have been eight, 8 or 9. And she was my whole world. Like, she was the only person I really clung to besides my grandparents. But she kept giving this, like, this idea, I'm gonna be dead soon. That was basically the tone of every time she talked to me. She used to say it, like, I'm gonna die soon. There was an obsession of death.
So
And then
she was talking about herself or you or
her,
both?
just her.
Oh, her.
She was
Okay.
gonna die. That was what
Okay.
stuff she used to tell me. She'd sit me down and say,
Okay.
I'm gonna be gone soon. And you can't prepare for that. Like, as a
Yeah.
kid, you can't do anything about that. I don't know if she ever said that to Tylee. I think she was too little, but she felt the need to tell me that. And then she started becoming way more in the times. And I remember we started doing the food storage. Now, at the same time, the LDS church was telling people to get prepared. And I think that she took that idea and blew it through. Like, now
Okay.
it's all about the end of the world.
Right.
And I think a lot of it was also the 2012. And now that I'm older, I think she thought the 2012 thing was going to happen. I think a lot of this was what I mean by fantastical is incorporating movies, incorporating
Right.
books, incorporating things that have absolutely nothing to do with reality. Now it's all just a big pool of whatever, fantasy you live in. So she started kind of having that with the end times thing. And I think she started feeling like that was part of her life in some way, the end.
Yeah, and yeah, that's interesting. Oftentimes, people that have delusions, they have a more difficult time distinguishing fantasy from reality.
Right.
That their memories become vague.
Yeah.
There's these things we have that we have these source memories that kind of let us know that something's real or
Mm.
something we've experienced. And when there's confusion about source memories versus, say, fictional memories, from watching a television show
Yeah.
or right, or a movie, and you're referencing the movie like 2012, right? Or I think that
Yeah.
wasn't that the year that Nostradamus predicted the end of the world or something?
Yeah. It's like
I think
the Aztec calendar
Aztec
stopped there,
calendar
and all
there,
kinds of
yeah,
stuff. And so people really believed. And that was, I think, the reason why the movie kind of popularized, but
right.
it was because people really truly believed that 2012 was going to be the end of the world. But she was kind of
Okay, I
on
remember.
that fad of it the whole time. So it wasn't something that just popped or became new. So
Right, so she was on that bandwagon for sure.
yeah. Yeah.
But it wasn't just that. I mean, in the call, she referenced the Chosen, right? She referenced like a
Yes.
specific season and a specific episode of the Chosen, and right. And when you and I
Yeah.
talked, you talked about her obsession with Twilight,
Yeah.
which was before any of
Yeah.
this. I mean, your mother seems to have this history of, you know, being unable to distinguish between pop culture fictional references and
Right.
reality.
Exactly. And I think that's what, because I know her so well, the stuff I started hearing about, she started talking about, so she loved the idea of how the vampires in Twilight basically became translated beings. So they're almost like, in a sense, it's almost a tiny, tiny bit biblical. Okay. I'm not going to give Twilight that much room, but there's this idea that you
I
go,
was I was just about to ask if the vampires could be converted to
yeah, right.
LDS.
That's kind of the point. The lady who wrote it was LDS. I think she
Right,
stole she stole some
yeah.
stuff out, right? I
Mm.
think what in the movies, right? I don't know if you've seen them, but in the movies, when you get bit by the
Yeah, I don't know
vampire,
if I should acknowledge whether I have or not,
no,
but
don't say it. I'll be honest. I've seen them. I'll talk for you.
I think I'm trying to debate here whether if I say I've seen them, that would help my
That would help you.
reputation or not. But okay,
I don't
let's
know.
put it like this: when you talked about this
Mhm.
um, after the Netflix interview,
Yeah.
and at that point I had not seen Twilight or read Twilight. And I felt like to get up to speed, I had to watch.
So he binged them. He's Team Edward and Team Jacob. It was research.
I did. It was absolutely. It was research. And actually, the funny thing is that, so when I got back from the Netflix interviews, I did watch it, and it did help me. I think it really did help me understand your mom.
Yeah.
It really did.
No lie.
Yeah.
I think that's the here's the thing. It's like, I've had to find how funny this really is because it's so ridiculous. I'm sorry, like not the horrible pieces, but some of it is so ridiculous because I know her. I watched the movies with her. She dragged me to go see them. And in Twilight, her obsession was the vampires being bitten and then translated over to being a vampire. And in that they have the skin, the perfect bodies again, is all the stuff. It's almost like what biblical resurrection is. But when I started hearing her what she was saying to other people, and this is all just little tidbits, but I'm like, you literally got that from Twilight. So how did it go from this idea that you don't need to eat, drink, or sleep, that you don't bleed anymore? You're not Spider-Man, okay? Right? You've seen Spider-Man 2. He says, punch me, I'll bleed. You're going to bleed. Like, this is when I was like, this is so crazy to me, because how are we at this point? How are we at a point where this is something we watched or consumed in media, and now you've brought it in so deep, the concept, and made it into religion? That is when I was like, there has to be something more here, because there's no way I'm going to watch Star Wars and then go around trying to force choke. Like, I don't translate the movie to my real life. So I guess that's when it started hitting me. It's like, okay, maybe there is actually something more here, because I know she knows what she did was wrong in the heart of her heart of hearts. But this idea of bringing the media in, and Chad saying he's the zombies. I asked her point blank about the zombies. She said she never said it. It's whatever. But
so on that issue, by the way, it's she did say that, but there's a lot of text between Chad and her where Chad's talking about destroying zombies and going out and killing zombies, and your mother replies with, I don't know if I'm trying to remember how she replied. I don't think she said the word zombies, but she called them Z's.
She called them Z's. What are you referring to?
What's the difference?
You're calling people zombies.
Right. And what's the difference, right? Like, so it shows the level of denial with your mother. Like, just because she didn't say it, just because she didn't use the word zombie.
Right. Or you can't find her saying the exact word zombie. She didn't say it. Yeah.
Right. Then she didn't believe it, or she didn't, right? Come on, because the evidence shows otherwise.
And that was the hardest part of the interview. Like, I walked in there knowing I'm not having a conversation like you and I. You and I could talk about anything and go back and forth. I knew that wasn't going to happen. So I actually had a list of questions. I was going to ask her about Chad. I asked her point blank about the zombies, but it cut out. So then the audio was gone. I don't know what happened to that. So like, there's a whole plan of the questions I had, because I started doing some research too. And one of the movies or shows I watched was Walking Dead, which I'm sure people have seen is a great show, because I was interested. I was like, some part of me wants to understand the pop culture references to your spirituality. And the most popular thing I know about is Walking Dead. There's lots of zombie movies, but in the show, and I'm glad we're bringing this up, because in the show, Herschel is someone they meet. Spoiler alert. Okay. And in the show, his biggest thing is that you can't kill the zombies because they're his family members, and he believes they're in there. He doesn't believe that they're gone. And then the other side is them trying to explain to him, no, they're not the same. They're not in there. There's nothing in there. And hearing them refer to human beings and talk about the biblical parts, where I brought it up to her in the interview and said, okay, so let's refer. And it was actually not, well, I think I said it was John 5. It's Mark 5. And I gave her that exact example to say, the person you say you serve, Jesus, encountered demons in the Bible And the first thing he does is cast them out, and the man is returned back to normal. So how do you take the idea of what basically The Walking Dead is and take this idea of full-on body possession and mix it all together and put it together? And it just has been eating me away for years because I can't get a straight answer out of her. And I knew I probably wouldn't. But
yeah. And I think when you were talking about Twilight
mhm,
and some of the pop cultural references, it started occurring to me. I mean, we talked about this a little bit in our podcast, but
mhm,
I started feeling like there's a kind of desperation.
yeah,
Even going back way before Chad Daybell, that your mother, it almost seems like to me, there's like this void or there's this abyss in your mom that she's trying to fill with
yeah,
something. I don't know, whatever that is.
right,
Um, and the pop culture and all this stuff, she just keeps throwing this in there to see if it sticks,
yeah,
if it's going to fill it, right? Because whatever this void is, it seems endless in your mom. And like, not only that, it feels like there's this desperation to fill it, and I think
oh yeah,
given that desperation, like it's a losing battle because you can throw
right,
anything in that void,
oh absolutely,
right? And it's not going to work. It's going to leave you feeling empty. And
and
there's almost a sense I have with your mom in which, there's this like it's sad too, right? Like
yeah, it is sad.
it's very sad because it never had to come to this, that there's this emptiness in your mom, this loneliness that she just can't find a way to overcome.
Yeah, I think what I assess, and I've never said this before, but I would rather say it with you because this is the conversation. Is my assessment is probably basic, but I know her very well. And I
Yeah.
think what happened is she needed to feel like all the suffering and hardship of her life had a purpose. And
Okay.
she didn't believe enough in just the grace and at least from me, the idea, the Christian value. And I think Christianity and LDS are different. I don't think people separate them, but they are in a lot of different ways. But she couldn't just accept being a person. She couldn't
Mhm.
accept the idea that hardship had befallen her. And so she needed set out on a quest. I'm so special. And I think the hardest part I had to come to was how narcissistic that really
Yeah.
is needing to be felt like you are the chosen one, like you're the top of the top. Excuse me. And I think Chad saw that in her, that
Yeah.
desperation, because she's very forthcoming. She'll just word vomit her stuff out and kind of give people maybe if they're manipulative ammo. And I think what
Right.
she did was just showed him so much attention, was so happy about his books, and he found that way to make her feel and tell her all these sweet nothings, literally just nothings, that you are all this stuff. And she said in her call, and I've been processing that as her saying, Jesus told me your life has a purpose. It's my purpose. It's for me.
Mhm.
Your all of it has meaning. She's searching so
Yeah.
deeply for meaning. She couldn't find it in our family. I guess she couldn't find it right in
Right.
front of her because she was blinded by all the fantastical ideas of being the chosen one or being something more than you are. And when she doubled down in that
Yeah.
and kept saying, this is all because of Jesus, I just wanted to scream. What are you talking about? Why couldn't you have just been happy with the life that God gave you and that you had all these people who loved you and you could have worked on your stuff in therapy and you could have had what everybody would dream of. People don't have their families. You have it right here. So, I don't know. That would be my take in all of it.
Yeah. No, that's a great analysis. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think our analysis is a version of that. And of
Yeah.
course, don't forget that Chad
Yeah.
referred to your mom repeatedly as a goddess. Like, I guess if you wanna win someone over, get them to
Nah.
believe that they're a goddess, right? I
Yeah.
guess.
Worship them.
Yeah.
But
Worship
if
them.
you want to be worshipped, then that's some serious stuff right there.
Yeah.
Because you can't serve, and this is just the truth. You can't say I want to serve Jesus he's my master, he's this person, and then also want to be worshipped as a goddess.
Right.
Gosh, there,
Yeah. Right.
their stuff is hard. It's so hard. It was so hard to listen to the tiniest bit ever. When
Yeah.
Ray Hermosillo was referring to them, you could tell he's just so bothered. He's like, you're like two little school kids just whispering to each other.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
just tough. Because I'm like, what are you doing? It's unrecognizable. You know, it's like, and I'm such a nerd when it comes to Star Wars, but I'll reference it. It's like watching Anakin go to Vader. That's what it was like. I'm not saying she's the chosen one. Let me be clear. And I'm not saying she was the best guy ever, but it's like watching someone go from this point to doing the worst thing ever to becoming a villain.
Mhm.
And that's what it was like for me, because I'm like, I knew you before this.
Yeah.
So how in the world did you get here? So that was kind of the main interest of the interview too. Would she answer those questions in an interview style? Would she really give me an answer? And the more I listened to it, the more dancing I heard. But at first it was emotional. It's hard to talk to her. And the stuff she said
Yeah.
was ridiculous. Just ridiculous. So what do you do with that?
Yeah, that's a question I think I would love to ask you. What number one, I mean, what do you think of what your mother said, and what do you do with it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure you've given that some thought since you
Yeah.
released it.
Oh, 100%. The number one thing is I already knew the evidence when I called her.
Yeah.
So I knew she was going to say something wild because her statement is clear, saying nothing happened. Right. So I'm like, hey, just be specific now, because you said it. So be specific. And then when
Right.
she verbally said that Tylee did it all, it was like a snapping point. I just didn't know. There was just nothing left in my mind. Because, like, you set up an interview, you have questions, you want to keep it linear, you want to try to keep it on track. And once she said it, it was just, I was like, how could you blame my little sister after you murdered her, and then
Yeah.
pin it on her and sit to me and tell me you're innocent? And not only are you innocent, that you are doing this to protect her. Because it's one of is it for Jesus, or is it to protect Tylee? Because the
Right.
story you made up is so out of this world. I can't even fathom how you came up with it. There's no evidence there.
Yeah.
Zero. That's not true at all. Tylee was taken. JJ was taken. They have all your text, email, everything that you did. So to pitch it to me as if this is what really happened, and then to refer to Job, refer to people who've suffered, refer to herself as suffering for a good cause, to tell me how much she loves Tylee, how much she loves JJ, how much she loves me, to say Charles was killed, or I'm sorry, died. All of it.
I think she said passed away.
Passed
Yeah.
away.
He passed
So
away, right? He wasn't murdered.
she made it in her mind and has been repeating it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it left me. I said, I'll never get anything more than this, I don't think. Ever.
Well, take me back to that moment.
Mhm.
So I mean, one thing I really appreciated about, and a lot of people I think appreciated about your interview, was that you showed a lot of restraint.
Yeah.
You said early on, look, I'm going to do all I can to listen to her.
Yeah.
As opposed to the call in 2020 that you played for me, where you were screaming at her to some
Yeah.
degree, right? You were so angry.
Yeah.
Justifiably so, but you were really, really angry at her. And that was the call that ended up in court too, by the way. But
Yeah.
but here you wanted to get her side, and so you just listened to that and you didn't really react. Tell us what you were thinking about when she said that. I mean, what was going through your mind at that point?
I didn't know what she was gonna say. Right. I'm anticipating something stupid. Right. I'm just
Okay.
anticipating her to say
Okay.
something stupid. The whole time it was just stupid. And I remember, before I get to that real quick, I remember one of them. I don't know if this
Yeah.
happened before or after, but there was a moment when she was telling me about her encounter with Jesus and then how she met Lucifer. And I started
Right.
crying again because I'm like, man, you're so far gone. There's
Yeah.
just these moments when I'm speaking to her. So I said, look, I want to know what happened, because at this point the phone has cut out so many times. There's people, screaming in the background, literally. Like, it's a chaotic phone call. There's no
Yeah.
order. She's already taken me off the rails emotionally. I'm trying to keep it together. So I said, look, forget everything else really right now. I have a lot of questions that I've had to organize. I'm just going to ask you. And when she started to explain herself, and she started to victimize herself, and then not only victimize herself, but then now Tylee is the ultimate bad guy, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had to turn a switch off. That's all I can really explain it. Like, I had to switch off that piece of me, because as calmly as I wanted to say it too, I would have said, well, then what evidence do you have of that? Why didn't you just call the cops? Why didn't you call the cops? Any person would, who went and took care of the kids after then. And then what? You were never going to tell anybody in the family. You wouldn't tell anybody's family members that loved them. You were just, she said, I didn't want to tell anybody. I wasn't rational. Okay, this wasn't all about you, but in her mind it was. So I think a part of me just shut off. And this was the reason also, John, that I interviewed her, because a part of me needed a base of ground where it felt like it wasn't just me calling her. And so I
Yeah.
said, I'm going to interview her because it gives me an organized list of questions that I genuinely have for myself, but I'll conduct it as if I'm talking to her in an interview. She'll answer a question, and then I'll go to the next one and we'll talk it through and see what she says. But when she blamed Tylee for everything, and then she told me that Tylee's desire was to be cremated, I wanted to vomit. And I just, you couldn't make it worse. It's when I've said this before about the media, I've said this before about this case. Every time you feel like you've healed from you have a scar left, something, finally a little bit healing over, that was like sticking a knife in and cutting it right back open, deeper than the first one. Because how in the world are you going to pitch me that when that's not even, we know that's not true. There's not even a slight bit of evidence. And then to say, well, did you know about her desires? Like, she was just so calm, and I guess in that moment I just shut it off. But my first thought was, how could you make this worse? How could you ever blame Tylee for this? How could you stoop that low? How?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's a good question.
And
I mean,
she truly just, that's when I was like, okay, I'm never going to get anywhere with you, ever. A part of me did it also because I thought in my mind for a couple of years now, I'm like, what if she did pass away and I never talked to her again, never said anything? Maybe I'd regret it, So I thought, maybe this is the time. Maybe this is the time, sooner than later. And so I made a plan and I asked her about it, and we did it. And, as hard as this is going to sound, I think it was a huge relief to me to know I left no stone unturned with her. I tried. I gave it everything I had. I tried. I never led her in a question. I never tried to get her to say something. I just let her speak, and I tried to give her the floor, and I tried to let her, you choose what comes out of your mouth. And that's what she chose to say to me and to the public. So that was where I was at. Is it just, I can't believe that's what you would choose to say.
And yet, in spite of all those statements, all those nonsensical statements she was making, she kept saying throughout, "You know how much I love you."
Yeah, that was
how much I love you.
Mhm.
Right? She kept when Lauren and I processed it, we kind of said, man, that was so manipulative, right? She's
Yeah.
trying to bring Colby back into the nest or to the fold, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
she doesn't want to let you go. And I mean, she just kept referencing how much she loves you and how you and her were the only ones who really
Yeah.
knew
Yeah.
Tylee and JJ, right?
Right.
And it was just this constant, repetitive, you know, theme for your mom about, how much I love you, how much I love you, how you're the most important one to me, right? And man, what was that like for you?
Oh my gosh. So I'll be honest with you, the first 2 days after the interview, right? I didn't even know if I'd posted or anything. Like I really spent the time to think it through and really think and pray on it. And I just remember like I was so emotional because like I never had this feeling where it was like a part of you is so understanding and so realistic about what this is, what she's saying, the situation, and then the other part of you is like a little kid who wants to like have his mom. And I was
Yeah,
like, what is going on with me? What is wrong with
yeah,
me? Why would I ever entertain that? Right? Like I was fighting this piece of me I didn't know existed because with all of this happening, so much trauma, you don't have time. She was the last person that I would have even picked to process. There's just too much in
yeah,
front of it. And I think after a while, you're like, wow, like a part of me misses this person, misses my mom, wishes that this was what I had. I wish she was a normal person and all these other thoughts. So those first 2 days, I was just emotionally wrecked. And then I think it was after I posted it and people started saying, and then I listened to your guys' video and people were saying how narcissistic she is and how horrible this is and how she really was. It really beyond opened my eyes because then I'm like, wait, yeah, this is horrible. Like this is her trying to pull me in on her BS by using the past and anchoring. And I think you said it best in your video. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but you did said that this whole thing is like her trying to hold on to him because it's all she's got left.
yeah,
And I try to make it clear with her, I'm not in your corner. And it's hard for me to say that to her, but it's true. I'm not in your corner. And I needed her to know it regardless of where she's at mentally. I had to say those words, I think, for myself and say, I'm saying this right now. This isn't the beginning of a relationship again. I'm not calling you 4 years later so we can tip back off and start this relationship all over again. This is basically my goodbye to you. And a part of the interview kind of was me saying goodbye to her in my own way. But
yeah.
she was just so on me and responsive. You know what? She said, she goes, "When do you think I changed? I've been a wonderful mother for 50 years." I said, "I'm 28. How have you been a wonderful mother for 50? You haven't been a mom for 50. You're barely over 50. What are you talking about?" So there's so much nonsensical. And when she brought up Ava, I wanted to snap on her. I wanted to snap on her the whole time. But just to say stupid things like that to me, to pull me in as if you are this spiritual person who's having
Yeah,
these experience, that my daughter her spirit left the womb to come comfort you. Tylee and JJ left heaven to come to comfort you. It
I know.
was so sickening.
Yeah,
But in that moment, I was trying to just zip it the best I could and just let her say it because I guess a part of me can say I don't have a ton of other questions now. I mean, I have a ton of questions about my dad, but I might get the same thing. I might get the
yeah,
exact same thing. She literally referred to him as dying. So what is the point of trying to get these things? I feel like I have to learn to just accept, and that helped me accept that she's just whatever the word is, gone. She's gone. And she doesn't even want to try to be here.
yeah. I think you just said something important earlier about there's a part of you that the kid in you that
Yeah.
still wants to connect to his mother, right? I mean
Yeah.
that part of you is never going to leave,
Yeah.
right? There's always a part of us that no matter how cruel our mothers are or our parents are to us, we still want them to love us. We still want to be
Yeah.
connected to them, right? And I definitely think she was appealing to that part of you.
Yeah, and that was what was hurt. That's what hurt, because I haven't I think a part of me just kind of killed her off in my mind. As brutal as that sounds, I kind of accepted her death almost. But then a part of me is
Yeah.
like, well, she's not dead. She's still here. She's right there. She's coming up. I see her. She's right there in the courtroom. I'm testifying here about what she's done to my family. And a part of you, I never processed the part of me that cares about her. Her and I never had a closed part of the book, right? I think with death, and I think I mentioned this, with death, there's almost a part of you that eventually can come around to a little bit of acceptance of understanding they're not here anymore, right?
Right.
She's
Yeah.
alive. She's
Yeah.
alive. So what do you do with that? And if anybody or anything is a zombie, it's like her. I would have wanted almost said it to her because I'm like, this is what I feel like a zombie is. It's a person who's standing in front of you who no longer is there. That's what it's like talking to. You're like talking to someone who's inside my mom's body. You're not even close to the same person. So how do you process that? What do you do with that? And I think a part of me after the interview just realized the thing I needed was just to give her one opportunity in a calm environment to explain her version. And gosh, I feel at first after she said that, and I was like, man, maybe this all was just a big mistake because of what she said. Because I'm like, I don't want her tarnishing Tylee's name in any way, shape, or form. No one
Yeah.
believes her, but the fact that she would even say it, the fact that she would even spit that out of her mouth was so hard to palate,
Yeah. Yeah. It's astounding.
Yeah.
It's astounding because it's not consistent with any of the evidence,
No.
right? It's not consistent with anything we know about the case. But sometimes when things are really unbearable and intolerable, we take certain elements of ourselves that we can't cope with and we put them on someone else.
Yeah.
And I think that's what she's doing. Tylee's like a stand-in for herself.
Yeah. I thought that was incredibly interesting for you to bring up too, because I never really looked at it like that. I've in my mind, and I'm just learning all these words and all these ideas, but I never looked at it from a perspective. This is actually something Kelsey was bringing up is Tylee being the scapegoat and me being the golden child. And I didn't
Yeah.
really understand what that meant because I never looked at it in any type of way. I didn't know what that meant at all. And it makes a lot of sense because was I think Tylee got sick and I know she had to go to the hospital, but I also know that Tylee really needed attention from my mom. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes it was for attention. And I'm not trying to ever tarnish my sister's name, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of other pieces of this that I think my mom had animosity towards Tylee. And I think that that is what's so hard to palate because it feels like to me that the way that that happened with Tylee and her murder felt like somebody was angry because you don't do that ever to anybody. And it just took so long to get to that point where I could accept that that was the fact. But there was animosity there, and they did butt heads a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that for her though to sit there and play both sides is crazy. How can you be so two-faced? How can you say
Yeah.
I'm defending Tylee yet blame her? But you're literally sitting here telling me, her brother, your son, that she did all of this and that it's her fault. But
Yeah.
Lori, am taking I'm standing in the gap. I'm taking all the blame for this. It's not my fault. It's her fault. But it's because I'm a good mom. And I'm like, it's just so disconnected that I
Yeah.
think a part of me could have almost accepted that immediately when she said it. This is so ridiculous that what's the point of talking? I'm not going to rebuttal you. If you're going to say something that out of pocket, then this isn't a conversation and there's nothing left to be said. You're obviously disconnected in there. And I think a part of me needed that full realization though, how
Yeah.
far gone she is and say, this is not on me. I don't know what that kid part of me or whatever it is to save your mom, try to somehow felt the responsibility of trying to save whatever was left and try to I thought maybe I'll get through to her.
Yeah.
Maybe something I say will get her to change her tune, and maybe she'll finally accept the reality. And I don't need an apology. I'm not begging her for an apology, because I'm not going to ask her for something that she's not going to give me. But
Right. Right.
I felt the
It
responsibility.
would be nice if she volunteered it, but she's nowhere
Right.
near that point.
Exactly. And that's the point.
You'll take it if she's honest about it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. This is what really frustrated me when I processed the interview. Is one of the things she said to me was, "I'm sorry, I couldn't do anything about this, and you're keeping me out of your lives. I kind of get why you're doing that." Wait, you just told me you're innocent and there's no reason. If you did nothing, then you wouldn't understand why I'm keeping you out of my life. You see what I'm saying? And you brought this point up, and I thought that was an incredibly good point. Is the contradictions to herself are so apparent.
Yeah.
So she kept saying one thing that completely contradicts the other thing she said, and it was just the simplicity of her saying, like, "I understand why you're keeping me out of your life. I get it." And I'm like, "Wait, why would you be okay with that if this is none of your fault? Nothing is your fault. Why would you be okay with that?" He said, "I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Stand on it." So,
What about the parts about not just blaming Tylee, but saying that Tylee did it to spite your mother?
that's a why would okay, let's just be logical. Why would Tylee kill JJ, her little brother that she absolutely loves,
Right.
to piss my mom off and kill herself? Who wins in that game? Let's just pull it out like that. Who would win there? It'd be one thing if you killed someone, like she killed him and ran away or something. It doesn't make any why would you even say that? There's no reason Tylee would do something, because that's the point. Now it's Tylee did it by accident, right? Another contradiction. Tylee either accidentally held JJ down too long, or Tylee did it in spite. Those are two completely different avenues. So what are you talking about? And that's the point. She can't keep herself together, right? She said Ava was her grandma. Ava's not her grandma. So I just, that was the thing I really got back from it though, too, is being able to pick up on that stuff. And you guys brought it up on your channel. And then I listened to it again and started hearing even more. And one thing that really I want to ask you about, because you said this in your video, but I wanted to ask you, is what did you think about when she was talking about "in my mind"? I didn't even know she said it more than once until I watched your video. What did you think about that?
That really stuck out to me, because it suggests there might be a little bit of doubt. I think it suggests that she's qualifying what she's saying.
Right.
That maybe it's not true, right? Maybe if there is a glimmer of hope,
right,
that maybe she can come to terms with that, with what happened and what she did. Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Because I think there's almost an acknowledgement there that maybe what she's saying isn't true. Maybe what she's saying isn't accurate. She's made it true to her, but maybe she knows at some level that it's just in her mind. It's not in yours.
Right.
Right. It's not in the court's mind. It's not in the jury's mind, but in her mind. This is how she see it. I mean, because even when I interview the most hardened criminals, right? They don't use that type of language.
Yeah.
You know, they don't say "in my mind." I mean, because that's, to me, that's like a tell. If they're saying that, then I'm gonna put in my notes a big question mark, and I'm gonna say, wait a minute, like this guy knows he's telling me something that's false.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't know she said it more than once. I remember she said it the one time she said, I said, "So all of this is to protect Tylee's name. I want to hear you say that." And she said, "In my mind, yes." And I thought, what an odd thing to say. Because like you said, why is it in your mind? Why would you even qualify it as a thought in your own mind? Because you know it's not true. And here was the hardest part, and I told you before, is going back to 2019. What was it? 2019, I found out she was married to Chad. The kids are missing. Everything had already happened. I found out that day Alex died. Same day. All of that was in one day and on December 19th. And all of a sudden she's just like this villain. And I see Nate Eaton go find her in Hawaii and the kids aren't there. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this person is like not the same person. And I think that's what's so hard is in those conversations. I had 3 conversations with her total in the whole span of after they found the kids.
Okay.
And every time, well, for especially that first time we talked in that call, her just dismissing and middle fingering. And then in this call, I didn't do that to you. I just was told not to tell you. I'm like, you literally said under your breath, where were you when that happened? Like, there's so many ways I could have just said what she said. Said, this is what you said before, and this is what you're saying now. None of this makes any sense. Like, it's one way or the other. And then you were the only one that ever took care of him, and now you're grouping me in there. So am I special now? Right? So it's really, I think that was the hard part is what is in your mind? Because you're obviously fabricating all this stuff. You had, from what I understand, you had Chad telling you all of this crazy stuff. But my question is, how do you buy it? I could tell you anything right now. That doesn't mean that you buy it, especially when it comes to religious beliefs. And I think that's where it's like my question becomes, what was really going on in her mind to cross over from Twilight to reality? How did you take all these aspects of your favorite romance novels and these things that you are fantasizing that are great and mix it all together? And it was really interesting. She calls Jesus my Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. So what is my mean? What does that mean?
And it's keep in mind, it's not just Twilight. It's also she's reading Julie Rowe.
Yeah.
You and I talked about that, right? She starts reading Julie Rowe. She starts reading some of these more extremist Mormon, I don't know what to call. I don't want to say prophets. Self-proclaimed prophets.
Self-proclaimed prophets.
I don't know. I guess that's
false prophets. Let's just say it out loud. False prophets, as straight as you can get it.
Right. So she's combining Twilight with this other material. Julie Rowe. She's reading Chad at some point, way before she meets Chad. Right. Like all of this is kind of mixing around. It's percolating in her mind, right? But I don't. But yeah, how does she land where she lands? Why I mean, I think you talked about this idea that she talked about the apocalypse all the time, right? We talked about that 4 years ago.
Yeah. Yep.
That she was obsessed with the apocalypse,
right?
Which apparently wasn't uncommon, I guess, in the Cox family. I guess it was sort of in the family culture. Do you remember that? Did the rest of her family, read and talk about the apocalypse all the time, or do you just remember it mainly being your mom?
She was really the main person in it. Like I said, at that time. Within that time frame, I think the LDS church was heavy on like go get your food storage in case something happens. There's going to be these LDS camps that they set up. So there was like this idea that it's coming and just be prepared for it. And then there was the people who were taking the doomsday prepper type of advancements where it's like an obsession where now you basically count down to that time. So everybody had some level of food prep. I think a lot of LDS people do, but she was the leader of this. And I think that was the other thing is like those books and that idea. I remember, I don't know if I should tell a story about Kelsey, but I'm going to try my best. We sat down, I think we were dating, maybe engaged, and she pulled her and I alone into the office and starts telling us about the stars aligning, right? And how this was a really big deal, that there was going to be this perfect alignment. And I remember in that moment, I thought, well, that happens in Hercules.
Okay.
And that's when the Titans are released in the movie Hercules, which we watched growing up. Okay. And so I think that was one of my first thoughts. I remember immediately connecting fiction and
Yeah.
reality. And this idea that somehow she's picking that up. But she was showing us these articles and they were talking about how this is going to, I don't remember what cosmic thing, but she's so convinced and convicted of what she's saying. It sounds very probable in a sense at first.
Right.
And
Yeah.
this is just in that way, like little things like that. Like, oh, the stars are aligning. Here's all these articles supporting that the stars are aligning, and this is what this is what I think it means. And it's kind of like, whoa, that'd be scary. That'd be the end of the world. So, and I'm gonna say something that I think is a little bit, well, it's just the truth. And it was kind of a dark thing I had to realize about my own growing up is I always had an impending doom. And I never really could remember why. That I always felt like I would slip into feeling like I would want to take my own life. And
Yeah.
I'm like, why do I feel that way? Maybe it's because in the back of my mind, I'm just expecting the end of the world. And I've been hearing about it my whole life. So I think that's kind of the stuff where it's like my questions come up is, as a parent, why would you ever say that? And what was going through your mind and what is in your mind? How are we getting to these points? And how are these books influencing you this much? Right?
Yeah.
Why are these books so fascinating? And I'll tell you another thing. One of the other things I was going to tell you too is that statement about her passing away with Tylee. She would have told everybody that. We all would have heard that story. So at some point, I think Chad got in her head and she started really being able to fabricate so much so easily. And I just don't understand how, because Chad could say whatever he wants, but you want to believe him. You want what he's saying to be true. And I think that was the hardest part is like, yeah, that's where I put, you can say whoever's the biggest catalyst, it's always a choice. I don't think Chad forced her to do anything she didn't want to do, as hard as that is to say. And he was also fantastical. I don't know him. I don't know too much about him, to be honest with you. But for her statements to be in my mind, it made me think this is all stuff, though, that's been building blocks to the past. And when you come to your kid and tell them you have a certain amount of time before you die, I think it starts there. Maybe you want to die. Maybe that's the ultimate relief of your pain in your life. That's got to be what it is. Why are you obsessed with being dead? And if you are, then why are you trying to alert everyone about this certain amount of time that you have? Like, how do you know you're dying soon? So I think that's for me, that's where it started. All of it starts. And then even the time that she wanted me and Tylee and her to all drive off a cliff. Like, why would you pitch that to us? She wanted to do it. We were driving from Texas to Arizona. And she said, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was all this stuff going on between all of our family dynamic. And she just pitched it to the car.
What year was that?
Oh man, we still lived in Texas, so it had to be before I was 13. So I want to say at least 10. So what? 05, 06, something like that. But
and so tell me the story. I don't think I haven't heard.
You haven't heard this story? I don't know if I
haven't heard the story. Yeah, I don't think you told me. So you guys are driving.
We're in the middle of nowhere. I think we're kind of in this place, and I wish, because I'm older now, I wish I could give you the location, but it had to be outside of El Paso, New Mexico area. And there's a part when you're on your way to Arizona where you're in the mountains and there's nothing around and it's just dead zone. And I remember it was just a really hard drive. We hadn't really talked much. It's a 16-hour drive. And she just was talking about stuff, and she talked to me like I was an adult. I didn't process this till I was older, but she would talk to me about stuff that's way beyond what you should talk to your kids about. So she would lay burden on me.
Yeah.
Like, she kind of talked to me like I was able to handle that. So I grew up with this sense of handling burden and never being able to give you mine. And Tylee was probably 2, and she just said to the car, "Why don't we just drive off the cliff?" And she was dead serious. Like, if we would have both said yes, I swear to you, she would have drove off the cliff. So I started freaking out. Tylee, I think, was 2, and it really breaks my heart because I think she said yes. She doesn't even know what she's saying. She has
Right.
no idea. She's 2. She's
Right.
just
She doesn't,
agreeing with her
right.
mom.
She doesn't
She's just
understand.
like, "Sure, whatever, mom. Whatever you say." And I'm in the front seat. I remember I started panicking. I said, "Mom, let me out of the car, please. Like, I'm really freaking out." She's like, "Colby, don't worry. Like, it's fine, whatever." Like, because I didn't know what the next move was. I was conscious enough to know that there was a decision possibly being made that we were all going to die right there. And all you had to do was just get off of the freeway and drive off one of the cliffs.
And what was your sense about the reasons, or what do you remember? What did something trigger
Yeah, it was just
her?
it was all the court stuff between all
Oh,
of her with Charles, and all the stuff they were going through with his kids, and all this stuff that was happening. It was all happening at once. And so we were on our way to Arizona to see family. And that's when
okay.
that happened. And having to process stuff like that just really like takes me back to this point of I had to realize how fascinated she was with death for
Yeah.
herself at first. And then for us, the idea to even ask your kids if we should do it, right? Like, conversate it out. Like,
Yeah.
if I would have agreed, I don't know if there would have been a rational thought after that. Because
Yeah.
it was like, get me out of this.
Yeah, that's really scary, Colby. I
Yeah.
haven't heard that, but you and I
Yeah.
talked a little about some of this, but now that you're
Yeah.
talking about it more, I just, I really feel for you in terms of growing up in this family where everything, like death, seems to underlie everything. It seems to underpin everything in your childhood. Your
Yeah.
mom's constantly talking about the apocalypse. She's talking about her dying all the time. She's talking, right? She's threatening to drive you off of cliffs. I
Yeah.
mean, holy cow.
Yeah. No, it's been hard. I'll tell you right now, like, this, as crazy as this is gonna sound, and as fast as this is gonna sound, it was like that was like a closing that book opened up all the other stuff really quickly. Once I realized with her and just shut it, finally was like, you know what? I'm done with this situation with my mom. Like, there's nothing left here to give. All of this other stuff started coming up again. And I'm just remembering how it really was. And honestly, it's discussions with Kelsey, really talking it out. And just like little things that just pop up that I remember, I'm like, man, as a parent, I just can't understand why you'd say that. Why would you do that? I would never say that to my daughters or my son. Never say it.
Yeah.
That would
And I,
never come out of my mouth.
yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's a big part of your story. Is it's one thing to process your demons, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing to have demons visit your dreams, right?
Yeah.
And for your nightmares to be populated with demons. It's another thing to wonder about ways to keep the demons out of your children's nightmares.
Yeah.
You know
That
what I
should be
mean?
your
Like,
goal. Yeah.
yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I worry that that human beings, and I'm not talking about you specifically, the human beings that go through these types of traumas, sometimes it's really difficult to keep these types of demons out of their children's dreams and nightmares.
No,
You
and
know, and
I'm glad you brought that up, because I'll tell you what, one thing right now, okay? And this is something I've thought about a lot. I will do anything humanly possible to not end up like my mother.
yeah,
Anything. I want to be the polar opposite. And honestly, Kelsey's helped me a lot with that, because she gives me that other perspective. And I've tried to make myself willing enough to always listen to what she has to say, because I can't, I've literally prayed, like, please don't let me ever end up like her. And I never want this trauma to pass on. Like, that's one thing I feel like I can give them is all one day my kids are going to grow up, and I'm sure they're going to be curious about this because this is a lot to tell your kids. I've thought, how am I supposed to explain it? I've told Riley knows about my family. She sees these pictures that I have behind me, like, but she doesn't know, right? She doesn't understand that. So
Yeah.
the one thing I want more than anything is to be the exact opposite. The exact opposite. Because I never want this burden to pass over. And that's the one thing I've thought is I want to get everything that I can, do everything that I can to never have any of this passed down to them ever.
Yeah.
That's a big, big thing to me.
Yeah, I can tell, and I appreciate that. I think just having these conversations is a good start, right?
Yeah.
Like talking to Kelsey about it is really important,
Yeah.
and so I appreciate the fact your channel, you one of the purposes of your channel is to deal with tough topics like this, right? So
Yeah.
um, so I really appreciate the courage you're showing and confronting this head on, and I think you're going to help a lot of people by being so vulnerable and so open about what you experienced, and confronting it directly rather than, as you pointed out, in your childhood, rather than running away and hiding from it.
Yeah. And that was the hardest part is like those 4 years of while this was happening, I was just like, just struggling because it's like
Yeah,
you're not ready to open the door on that, and the cases aren't done. You can't really talk about it. I wanted to at least try to tell my siblings stories through the documentary. That didn't happen. So it's like I just felt stuck, and I'm like, you know what? At some point, I hope I can help someone else. And even with some of this stuff that is beliefs, that was one of my main passions too. Is what we've talked about today, is the belief systems of not if someone is having those belief systems really. I don't know what you can do exactly, but if I would have been conscious enough to really think that there's something going on with my mom and really see it and really be willing to see it, right? I really hope I would have this type of thing of confronting her before. That's always like my biggest thing. I'm like, I wish I could have been like, what are you doing before any of this started? You know? But I really hope it just helps anybody, especially if they're falling into those beliefs. I know there's other
yeah,
people who believe what Chad has said before, and I'm praying on everything that they can walk away from that, because you have to see the contradiction. You have to be able to see that this leads you to know good things. And
right.
so I think that's another big part of it. But I appreciate you saying that. And again, I honestly don't know how I'd process it and without watching your guys' channel, without hearing your type of perspective where it wasn't coming in to angle in to get something to be said, to get something just to hit the press. You really share your thoughts and you really care. And so that's when I was like, wow, maybe we can talk about this and just have a discussion rather it being media frenzy and letting it just be this thing that hits the news as it did with everybody else. Once they heard the interview, they just go and they highlight that one thing and they put it as a headline. And I'm like, the whole point is there's supposed to be a conversation that's deeper than that. Of course, I get it. That's how it works. But
Right.
there's more to it. There's more to this. Right.
Right. Everybody wants the soundbite, right? They want the sexy soundbite that's going to get clicks. But yeah,
Yeah.
which is why I'm so glad that you asked me to follow up with you and to talk about it, and
Yeah.
to have an opportunity for us to dig a little deeper into this. Um, and we as you pointed out, we met years ago, so
Yeah. It's crazy.
I think there's some level of trust there over these
Yeah.
years um, that matters to me. So
Me too.
I'm really glad to do this, Colby, and I'm glad to see what you're doing with your channel. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And again, that's another thing I wanted to say to you is how much I appreciate what you guys are doing, because I don't know about anybody else who's in our case specifically, but for me to have a place to sit there and listen to the hard stuff without it being on, again, here's a flash, right? And this is another heavy thing is like I saw the picture of Tylee, uh, her skull on a
Yeah.
thumbnail.
Oh
You know what I
man.
mean? Like it's just they just want somebody to see it and click it.
Mm.
And that's the type of stuff where it's like you can't get anywhere with that kind of stuff. You can tell
Yeah.
everybody this hot flash thing, but that's not going to get anything. And that's just here's information. So you guys sit there and have that conversation, and both Lauren and your perspectives have just been so good for me because it's not the same thing. And so I just had to, again, I know I've said it like 10 times, but I have to thank you publicly because it has been seriously really, really good for me. And I think
Thanks.
it really did again inspire me to say this can be a conversation, and people are going to think what they want after you say it, but
Right.
that's fine. Make your
Yeah.
conclusion with what you want, but at least I know I said my piece, and that is exactly what you guys are doing. So I really appreciate you for that. And you did leave an impression on me in 2020. So I'm glad that we were able to reconnect and talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it took a while for us to reconnect, but I
No.
mean, we
Yeah.
had some conversations over the years, but
Yeah, exactly.
I think my I gave you my number back then and I said, if you want to talk or if you need me, just let me know. And
Yeah.
I always felt like, and I was, I was sincere about that. I
Yeah.
always felt
Yeah.
like, if you want to, or if you're ready, you're going to find me,
Yeah.
and that's how it should be. I don't want to force anyone to talk or
Right.
right or if they're
Right.
not ready and so here you are and I'm grateful for that. So
Yeah.
I really hope that um you can find some measure of peace through all of this. And I know that's going to take time. That's going to be
Yeah.
a really arduous, long process. But but you are facing those demons head on,
Yeah.
and that's difficult.
If something happens that you can't you just learn the lessons yourself, but if you can help other people, that's like the number one goal. If I say something good or can give you perspective, I just pray it touches somebody and helps them. So I appreciate you saying that, and I'm glad that we connected. I'm glad I can talk to you because you're somebody that I really respect and really respect your opinion, and I really appreciate your take. So it's been really good to have that, and I really hope from this point forward too for the channel is to just continue down that path and try to just hit it up front and get out the things that need to be said, and then keep moving forward from there. So that's going to be the goal.
Yeah,
Keep going,
awesome.
but
I'm confident you'll do it, Colby.
I appreciate it, man. All right, well, thank you for coming on the channel. I
Yeah,
appreciate you
absolutely. Happy to
again.
be here.
Yeah. Again, anybody who wants to know, if you don't know already, check out Hidden True Crimes channel. Again, like I told you, I can say a million good things about it, but I think you just got to go listen to what they're doing over there, and they've been really incredible, and so loving and respectful. So just had to say that. But we're gonna go talk after this. So love you guys. Thank you, and I appreciate you, John. You know that.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me, and I wish you all the best. And of course, I'm always available, Colby.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, man.
All right. Take care. Good night.
You too. Good night.